Well, good afternoon, everyone. I know it being June 1st, I know some of you are either finished with your school year or you're right there on the end and you're about to cross the finish line, which is very exciting. So I appreciate you being on. I know we have a couple who will be joining us in just a little bit as well. So I know the time of year is tough. So thank you for joining our advisory council meeting today. We have some very important updates we're going to review as you've seen on the agenda. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Aiken, and she's going to go over our attendance for today. And Sarah, I tell you what, if you want to wait just a little bit, because it looks like we only have a few, so I think it's pretty easy right now. We may do it in just a little while. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I can just kind of watch throughout the meeting and just mark off anybody that joins. That'll be fine.
I think that'd be a little bit easier.
Okay.
All right. So let me share my screen just really fast. So first, just to get a little bit of a reflection from you all that are on, I would love for you to share something from this past year that you have accomplished within your school counseling program, for yourself as a counselor, something you've grown in. So just anything you want to just share today. I'd love to hear it.
I'll throw something out there.
Okay,
Can you hear me?
Yes, Travis. Thank you.
Awesome. My counterpart, Ashley Bottoms, and I, she's really leading the charge with this, but incorporating Tableau visualizations in order to find the students that are, struggling in one way or another, in particular, future dropout risks and whatnot, and really, it's informed discussions on what to do, how to support those kids, and so I think that's that's a great development. I don't know if people are using that out there, but we're just scratching the surface with it, and that's an amazing tool in IC. So.
Okay. Yeah, because Travis, I know that data is used for our equity dashboard. So it sounds like you are using it for kind of a different purpose, correct?
Well, yeah, you can even yeah, it's definitely equity dashboard stuff, but like one thing within it is like, well, like I said, huge, like the discussions that we've been having are like it shows students that are at risk for dropout. Like you can, filter it in that way, and it's really spot on. Like like if we made a list without it, and then here's Tableau, and it hit it pretty much on the head, and then told us a few students that maybe we hadn't thought of that fit that description. So, yeah.
Well, it sounds like it's very useful and it's proactive. So that's exciting moving into next school year as well.
Yeah, it's very much data driven, obviously, so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I may have to hear more about that very soon. So I may be emailing you. I'd like to see some of that. Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Some accomplishments, some growth area, anything from this year that you'd like to reflect about? Okay. If you think of something, I would really like to hear it or even type it in the chat, because I know this is the time of year where we really need to think about the past school year of survival and getting through it and looking at anything that you have accomplished, no matter how small you may consider it, it's not. And then moving into next school year, anything you found that you may want to grow with, whether it's be professional development opportunities you can find or other colleagues that you may want to collaborate with. So now would be a great time just to think about that going into next year as you start shutting down for the summer, as much as you can. All right, so we have some special guests with us today that I'm so thankful are here. Um, we have Lindsay Swartz and Todd Allen within our legal department here at the Kentucky Department of Education, and they're going to help us with any questions, clarifications around Senate Bill 150. So we have put together a guidance document specifically for school counselors. You've seen some of the other ones that were already released. And those are, of course, still relevant for what we do as school counselors, but this is specifically for some of the questions I know I've been getting. And if I were back in my role as a school counselor, I would have the exact same questions. So we're going to go through that document that's still in draft form. But this is your time to ask questions, to get any clarifications that you may need. So let me switch my screens really fast. And I'll get the document pulled up. Okay. All right. Can you all see that? Try to make it a little bit bigger. There you go. Okay. All right, so this is our guidance document. Again, it's still in draft form, so it's going to be released pretty soon. And of course, part of your role with this council is giving feedback. So if there's anything you might want us to consider putting in it, that's part of your role being here. So based on the guidance that was released by Senate Bill 150 back in April, some of those other documents are found in that link. So you do still have that right there up front. So here are some of the questions that I know we have been discussing that we've been getting for school counselors. So the first one was, are school counselors required to notify or obtain parental consent prior to providing academic and career counseling? And the answer is no. Based on Section 1 within Senate Bill 150, those mental health services that are provided by those providers shall not include academic or career counseling. And so then it goes on to define, like we've seen this definition before, what a school-based mental health provider actually is between school counselors, school psychologists, social workers, and those other qualified professionals like your school-based therapist. So therefore, a school counselor does not need parental consent to provide academic or career counseling. So considering that, do you all have any questions or clarifications about that part? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. And if you think of something, please stop me. The next question was, must school counseling services be included in the annual parent notification of health and mental health services provided to parents at the start of the school year or upon enrollment? So again, in Section 1, it talks about upon the student's enrollment. That's what the law states now at the beginning of the year. The district will provide notification to the student's parents, listing all those mental health and health services related to human sexuality, contraception, or family planning available at the student's school, and of the parent's rights to withhold consent or decline those specific services. So for school counselors, parental notification applies to mental health services available to all students at the school, including those provided by a certified school counselor. However, the notification is only required for those mental health services that are related to human sexuality, contraception, or family planning. So no notification is required for academic or career counseling. Furthermore, the annual notification is not to cover any mental health services provided by a counselor that are not related to human sexuality, contraception, or family planning. So any questions or clarifications about that one?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Guess clarification. So it says parental notification applies to mental health services available to all students at the school, including those provided by the school counselor, by a certified school counselor. And then it goes on to say, however, right, as it pertains only to human sexuality, contraception, and family planning. So social emotional, like what I'm reading here is like the academic domain and the career, the career domain, college career domain is old school guidance counseling is fine, no notification. SEL, I'm still kind of those two sentences together tells me yes and then no in regards to SEL, like counseling. And I didn't know what the thought was with that.
Yeah. So I know Lindsay and Todd, we have you on here, and Mickey, you're here. That was, I think, my first question when we were coming up with this guidance is they don't mention that social emotional learning and none of those topics. So based on this language, that does not that's not going to be included with any of this. It's only those 3 topics for mental health services that are tied to human sexuality, contraception, or family planning.
Yeah, so I think, can you all hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Hi, Todd.
Thank you all for having us here. I think this is our first time with this group, but certainly privileged to be here with you all and answer questions to the extent we can. And if we can't, your feedback is still very valuable because it helps us advise these types of guidance documents that we're putting out. On your question, I think it's a good one, and we can probably tweak that first sentence a bit to make it a little bit more clear, the relationship between the first sentence and the second sentence there. Ultimately, I think this is going to be a district determination whether or not the district is going to permit these types of services related to human sexuality, contraception, or family planning. So that's decision point number 1. They're going to have to determine whether they're going to permit that. If they do, then they're going to have to engage in parental notification to tell all parents we do provide these types of services to students and give them the opportunity to opt out. If they don't, however, then they don't have to provide that notification and give the parents the opportunity to opt out. What does that mean for the counselor in practice? What it means is if the district has allowed that and provided the notification to parents and the parents don't opt out, then in the context of social emotional learning counseling, you can go into these topics of human sexuality, contraception, or family planning. If, however, the district says we're not doing that, then I think that's going to it's going to limit the types of social emotional counseling that you can provide to those students. When they begin to delve into these topics, it would seem that at that point in time, it has to be, the focus has to be shifted away from these topics because the district has made a determination that they're not going to permit the mental health services related to human sexuality, contraception, or family planning. Does that answer the question? Provide any clarity?
So Todd, for example, I know we had discussed before, when we think about social emotional learning, we are thinking about things, as far as self-management, goal setting, healthy relationships, and none of that would be tied to those 3 topics. So if I'm a school counselor, I think that's where we need clarification on, do we have to provide that notification and get consent from a parent if we are going to counsel a student about, let's say, a peer conflict with a friend? That would technically be a social emotional learning topic. So I think that's where we need a little bit of clarification just to make sure, if we have a student upset because they've had an argument with a friend, do we have to then go get parent consent to talk to that student over a conflict, which would
No.
technically be a social emotional learning topic, if that makes sense?
It does. And I think the answer to that example that you provide would be no,
Okay.
because that's not going to, there's nothing in the example that you indicate that would be an issue of human sexuality, contraception, or family planning. So
Okay.
everything else is fair game, we'll say.
Okay. Okay. I think I saw some hands up. I think Sarah, Kate, I think it disappeared on me. So make sure if you want to unmute and ask your questions.
I can ask mine. So I'm in the elementary school level, and I very frequently have girls come to me with their first periods. And for some of them, they have no idea what's happening and they think that they're dying. Is that my concerns, my overall concerns with this is, one, like when I go in and I talk to my kiddos about what a school counselor is and what they may see a school counselor for, when I approach the older grades, I do mention, ladies, if you get your period, I have everything you need in my office, because I am trying to take away the stigma and the embarrassment that should be there around it. And then also, when a girl comes to me and she's had her period, do I have to notify the parent and get permission before I tell them this is what's happening? You're not dying. This is normal.
Sure. So in that context, I think that just the telling students that you have the supplies that they may need in that situation and providing those supplies to them, that runs no foul of this law whatsoever. So that's completely permissible without any type of parental notification. If there are going to be conversations and mental health services related to human sexuality, right? What is happening to your body and why it's happening to your body, what it means in the scheme of, the reproductive system, things of that nature, then at that point in time, that is probably something that would require parental notification. So I think that if that notification has been provided to the parent and they've consented, then you're, free to engage in the typical conversation that you would have. If it hasn't been provided to them or it's been provided and they have not consented, then you would be more limited just to providing the student with the supplies that they need, explaining that this is a natural body occurrence that happens, but not really going into the details of how that interplays with the reproductive system, et cetera.
Yeah, and I don't hit on that.
Okay.
And then also, with 4th and 5th grade, there's always the hygiene talk, and you're growing up, your body's changing. We don't get into a ton of details, but we do mention, you got to start using deodorant. You got to use soap. I tell them, stick your finger in your belly button and smell it, and they're all grossed out. And I'm like, that's what you smell like if you're not using soap in all your crevices. Like, y'all need to use soap. And is that, we don't go into many detail, but we do talk about, you guys are growing up, your body's going through changes. Here's how you take care of it. Is that something that has to get parental notification?
Yeah, what you've stated there doesn't seem to me to fall into the categories of human sexuality, contraception, or family planning. So I would say no. Those conversations on hygiene, proper use of deodorant, bathing, things of that nature, and just mentioning that human bodies go through changes at various times as you transition from being a child to an adult. That doesn't, in my opinion, go to the level of human sexuality, contraception, or family planning, and I think that would be permissible.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Kate. Okay, Sarah, did you have a question?
Your question to Todd kind of answered mine. I was also thinking about like the typical lessons that I would always do with my students. Kind of like you mentioned, there's peer conflict, like conflict resolution, being a good friend, those types of things. If we were going to have to get permission for those, but you already answered that. That was just the first thing that had come to my mind. So, but thank you for clarifying that for me.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Any other questions or clarifications about this one? I know, because we knew this was going to have some questions.
I just thought I'd throw out there that we do, like Kate mentioned, we do a puberty talk with 4th and 5th and a boundaries talk that's tied together. And our counseling department collaborates. It's really led by the Frisky Center at our school, but it pulls me and other counselor in. But we just kind of out of the spirit of transparency, we send home a letter to let them know that we're doing that talk. And it really fosters a lot of conversations, which are great because parents will be like, are you talking about things that are way farther into birds and bees and sexual orientation and whatnot that we don't even touch? And it allows us to talk about that. to the parents, right? And say, no, this is what we're doing, which I think is the heart of the, I'm maybe I'm being too optimistic here, but I'm hoping that's the heart of the bill. But I still am worried that a student's going to come to me and say that their dad or mom is being really hard on them. They're crying because they had an argument on the way to school. I talk to the student. This is a very normal occurrence, right? We talk, we get them grounded and ready to, I get them grounded and ready to go back to class and whatnot. And if they were to share with parents, yeah, I was mad at the beginning of school, but I talked with Mr. Kern. And then the parent being like, he should have notified me. And it doesn't fall within those areas of sexuality, contraception, and family planning. I guess for the reason of clarity and for just to be cautious, I am okay to not call the parent about that, right? Like if we have a conversation like that.
So I think the question that you're asking is more not based on the advance notification at the beginning of the school year or upon enrollment, but the provision of the bill that deals with notification after the fact of services.
Yes.
And that is different.
That's different. Okay.
Heather, are we going to discuss that in a little bit about the post notification? If not, I can address it here.
I think it's done in here, but if you want to go ahead and do it now, I would think go ahead because I think it's relevant to this one too. So yes,
Sure.
Go ahead, Todd. Yes.
So the Senate Bill 150 is much more broad with regard to the post notification provisions. So that scenario that you just described, you would not have to have, the district wouldn't have had to have sent a notice to the parent in advance regarding the services because they're not related to human sexuality, contraception, or family planning and gotten their consent. But after the fact, they are supposed to get a notification that the student, if the student was referred for health or mental health services. So the fact that the student got referred to the counselor's office, the parent is supposed to get a notification of that. We've received a question also from school nurses, if the student gets referred for a Tylenol in the school nurse's office, based on the provisions of the bill, a notice should go home that says the student was referred to the school nurse and we administer Tylenol to give that parent that notice.
If they walk in on their own without a referral, is that?
The bill says referred. So if we're, technically no, if they weren't referred, if they walked in themselves, then that wouldn't be a referral by the district, right? That would be a student seeking help themselves.
I mean, goodness gracious.
That isn't care.
Somebody's going to abuse at home. There's no.
Yeah. Now, that situation that you bring up, there's also a specific provision in the bill that says if you believe that reporting to the parent would lead to the child being neglected or abused, then you're not required to make that report. So if you think if I call mom and tell her that the student came in and reported this conflict at home, and as a result, it's going to result in the student being abused at home, then you don't make the report to the parent.
Now, that doesn't pertain to if a student comes to me and says, I want to change my pronouns, right? Because if they're telling me that and they don't want to tell their parents for fear of whatever, I still have to notify the parent?
So in that situation, if the student comes to you, they're not referred by anybody else in the district, I think that's a situation that we just discussed. The bill doesn't require notice to go home to the parent because there was no referral made for mental health services, right? The student just came in on his or her own and asked those questions. There is a provision in the bill that indicates that when that happens, the school, whether it's the counselor or some other school official, should encourage the student to speak with their family members about that situation. So, if the student comes to you about changing their pronouns, the bill indicates that you should speak to the student and encourage him or her to speak with their parents about their desire to change their pronouns. Now, obviously, if at any point in that conversation, if the student reveals to you that they're being abused at home for that or any other reason, then you have the duty to report that to CHFS.
Okay, so I just have a clarifying question based off of just the conversation that the question that we just had. So kind of the same example, a similar example that Travis shared. You know, let's say a student comes in to their class that morning, they're visibly upset, and the teacher, you know, calls the counseling office and says, hey, so-and-so needs to come see you. I'm going to send them up there to see you. I'm not really sure what's going on. You know, they come up there to see us, and basically we find out that kind of a similar situation. You know, they've had a really bad morning. They got in an argument with their mom or dad. They didn't get to eat breakfast, whatever the case is. And, you know, it could be something, you know, that something so small, like I'm really anxious about this test, and then my mom yelled at me, and it just got me all, you know, flustered. So even if we did not make a referral, we did not refer out to any mental health services or to any, you know, physical health services, we just simply talked to the student, kind of calmed them down, gave them some strategies to kind of work through the day. We still need to contact that parent that we saw them, and this is why we saw them, and this is what we did.
So I think your question's a really good one from the perspective of internal to the district or external mental health services. And the bill says that you have to notify parents of a referral for either internal or external. So the fact that the student was referred by a teacher to the counselor for mental health services is a referral under the language of the bill that would require notification to the parent that referral was made.
So an additional question, I'm sorry, since that is going to be different, I mean, we have a blanket statement that goes out in our student handbook that parents sign off on that says a child may be referred to the school counselor. They may be seen one time or several times, like this is the service that she provides. If you don't wish for your student to see the school counselor, please return something in writing. And
Right.
that has kind of covered it. And I do not always notify parents when a student comes to talk to me. You know, it's based on the situation at hand and what it dictates. So with that now added on, what is the state doing to ensure that school counselors are, you know, having the recommended student to counselor ratio, and that all the counseling related duties are being removed from counselors, so that we have that additional time to reach out to parents and make those necessary contacts now?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for that. This bill didn't provide any additional funding for school counselors, you know, or school nurses for that matter, to cover the health services side of this and the time involved in making those referrals. So I know that's not the answer that you wanted to hear, but there was no additional funding or provisions provided related to this. I think the question that really needs to be asked from a process perspective is what type of notification system will the district implement? What type of forms will they require? You know, is this something that you're supposed to pick up the phone or send an email to the parent in order to notify them, or does the district have a more formal, streamlined process, hopefully more efficient, in place, where perhaps a computer system would generate some of these notices and perform some of this work for you? I think that's going to vary district by district in what they put in place.
Todd, can I ask, I guess, a odd question?
Sure.
Going back to, like, I know Sarah kind of mentioned it. I think Travis, I think they were getting there with, you know, kind of this is a little bit more specific with what they were asking. So if that teacher, if it's a phone call referral, there's not a form. Like, I know I used to have a Google form that, you know, they may fill out for me to see a student. The students may even come up to the office, and they had a little bitty, like, half sheet of paper that they would fill out. They would stick it on my door of who needed to come see us. So does that count as a I guess, a referral, or is just a teacher calling and saying, hey, can you come check on this kid sometime today for XYZ? Does that also
Yeah,
count as a referral technically, or does it need to be some type of,
in
I
my
guess,
mind, that's a
more?
referral.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
That
Okay.
is some school staff member has determined that the student is in need of mental health services and recognizes that the professional to provide those services is the school counselor and has made a referral for the school counselor to see that student in order to satisfy that need. I think that is a referral. Now, again, I think that one of the questions will be, does the school district really tighten down some of its processes to require that teacher fill out a form instead of making a call? And is that what generates the notice to the parent that this referral occurred? Technology could assist with some of the administrative burdens that this law creates. It won't be able to solve all of them. And of course, that takes time and money to implement that as well.
Yeah.
So it may be
Okay.
that we don't see that for several years.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
I'm
because
sorry, Heather. Go ahead. You go ahead and finish. I'm so sorry.
no, I was just gonna say, Sarah, that I think coming from our questions is, I think, and I know we're considering our ethical considerations as well, based on, what's recommended for us nationally is, and I know legal overrides ethical, but I think that's where we are struggling with this is there are some times we may not notify a parent, not to keep them in the dark, and it's never anything like that. It's just Kate mentioned our use of time, and we, I mean, you know, most of our ratios are very low. So I think that's what our concern is. If we have, we may talk to a student for 5 minutes to help them regulate to get back to class. Now we're having to talk to, like, tell a parent. So I mean that could add up very quickly. Yeah. So I think we're just
Yeah.
considering some of that.
Sure. And I will
And
also throw
yeah.
out there the bill requires that schools should develop and implement procedures for notifying families of referrals for any health services or mental health services, and that's regardless of whether or not they're related to human sexuality, contraception, or family planning. But all it needs to say is that they were referred for some of those services. There's no requirement that it be detailed about the conversations that occurred, about what the outcome was. Simply notifying the parent that the student was referred on a certain date to the school counselor would seem to satisfy this requirement. Now, if this family follows up and they want to make requests for records and things of that nature to the district related to it, then that's another issue that has to be addressed. And of course, more time.
Oh yeah, they will for sure follow up very quickly.
Someone called me as a school counselor, like huge mental health supporter, and was like, your child was referred to the school counselor today. I'm going to be like, okay, why?
Yeah.
I mean, I think I have more understanding of not like prying for details and wanting
Sure.
a word for word transcription like some of our parents, but I would want to know why.
Yeah.
And I think that needs to be planned for in this, because the next question is going to be why.
And I completely respect that. Keep in mind, I'm just the messenger here. I didn't come up with these requirements. And that's something, again, that you're certainly, you can include why in the notice. I'm just saying it's not required by the law that's in place.
Okay.
Now,
so,
Todd, just to kind of thinking about just your earlier statement about like career and academic, let's say a teacher, I'm using this example, a teacher says, hey, could you really talk to this student about this in my class? Like, I feel like he's really struggling with the material. We talk through that. We come to find out maybe he's just struggling with a piece of material. That's academic related. That's not necessarily
not health services or mental health services. So then you wouldn't provide any.
Okay. But I can see people finding a loophole with that and saying, oh, it was just academic, and oh, it was just academic. It was just career. Like, we didn't talk about anything else. I can see where people could use that as a loophole, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because if we're getting into the weeds, kind of like you mentioned, Sarah, technically what Travis mentioned was some SEL topics. It may not be mental health related, like the conflict with a peer, for example. That's not necessarily mental health. So, yeah.
And that's really where it's going to come down to a lot of those district procedures about referrals, right? Whenever someone refers the student to the counselor, is this for a health service or a mental health service, or is it anything else? Because it's only health service and mental health service that require that notification to be triggered to go to the parent that they were referred.
Okay.
I'm not sure if your school administrators or district administrators have sent out anything to have any conversations. I know that school districts are just now in the process of adopting policies related to this. The School Boards Association is just now sending those out. So I would definitely stay tuned and continue to have conversations with administrators about, the specific process details about how that works.
One quick question. Self-referral. Student says, "Hey, Mr. Kern, I'd like to talk with you. When's a good time?" Is that? I would love for that not to be a referral.
Yeah, that's a good question. We'll go back. Lindsay, do you want to flag that for us to go back and we can clarify that a little bit more in this guidance document to look at the specific language of the statute?
Sure.
I believe it says referred by the district for those services, not self-referral. So take a look.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Travis. That's a good question. Okay, so the next section mentions referrals. It says, do school counselors need to notify parents of referrals for health services or mental health services? And I think that's what you just kind of mentioned. Yes. Schools should develop and implement procedures for notifying families of referrals for any health or mental health services, regardless whether they are related to human sexuality, contraception, or family planning. So that's what you just discussed, Todd. It's going to be regardless whether they're related to those three topics, like up in the first part of the document. This is any other, technically, could be any other topic, just like you mentioned. Okay. Okay. And then there's, of course, what section 1 states about that. Okay. And then, okay. So now it gets into the well-being questionnaire, which I know I've had a lot of questions about this one. Is parental consent required prior to administration of well-being questionnaires or assessments used to help plan interventions within the school's established multi-tiered systems of support? So in section 1, it states prior to a well-being questionnaire or assessment or a health screening form being given to a child for research purposes, the school district shall provide the student's parent with access to review the material and shall obtain parental consent. Parental consent shall not be a general consent to these assessments or forms, but shall be required for each assessment or form. A parent's refusal to consent shall not be an indicator of having a belief regarding the topic of the assessment or form. So based on that, Todd, Lindsay, I know I've had some questions about what if the questionnaire assessment is not being used necessarily for research. It is used for planning and providing services for all students at the tier 1 level, or creating interventions for students at the tier 2 level. Does that still count towards research, or is that a separate from that type of questionnaire or assessment for well-being?
So good question. This is conditioned on research purposes. I would say if you are administering a questionnaire for planning an individual student's programming, some type of intervention services that you were talking about, that would not seem to me to be for research purposes. Of course, we don't have a definition of research purposes. They didn't give us that. So we're left to make that determination, right? That seems more to me a broad survey that's going to be given to a group of students to determine what percentage of students feel a certain way or respond a certain way, strictly for research, not for planning an individual student's programming. I would also note here, there is federal law that has been in place for many years. It's called the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment. You may be familiar with that, or the PPRA. And it already for many years has indicated that parents must consent before you survey a student on particular topics. And it has, specific topics such as religion that's practiced in the home, things of that nature. So given those federal requirements that were already in place, we don't see this one being extremely different or onerous on school districts and staff as a result of that. But to answer your specific question, the survey for student programming for intervention services, I would not consider that to be a research purpose.
Okay.
That's student programming. That's not research.
Okay. So, for example, and thank you so much for being here. I cannot tell you how much we appreciate it. If I administer, like most schools do now, they have a universal screener that has social emotional learning topics, some college career topics. It does not go into mental health or sexuality. It's just based on social emotional skills. Can they handle hard situations? Can they self-manage their emotions? Do they know how to goal set? Do they have a support system in place? So some things like that. So if it's a type of a social emotional screener, does that fall under well-being to need parent permission versus just an opt-out form? Like typically that's what's been done for a lot of those types of screeners because they did not cover those topics you mentioned in the federal law.
So what's the purpose of that? What is it ultimately used for, and who gets it? Every student? What? So give me some more information about that.
Okay. So and of course and that's just one example. So typically for our schools who deliver some type of social emotional screener or survey, every student gets it. And the purpose is to, number one, determine if their social emotional learning implementation is being done with fidelity. So it will help tweak and drive planning for tier 1 implementations for all students. It could help plan tier 2 interventions for smaller groups of students who need extra support. So that's typically the purposes of that. Just kind of in a nutshell.
Right. So are the results aggregated and that in general students need certain supports in certain areas, or is it more individualized? Todd's responses and Todd needs X, Y, and Z.
So it's a little bit of both. So for example, it will show every student's results typically, but it's usually used on a broader scale. Unless some red flags may jump out depending on the questions again, because some of them do not go into some of the more mental health type questions. Some screeners do, some don't. Which those other screeners with mental health questions, they have to have the parent consent, which, like you said, we should have already been doing. So I guess I'm asking for a screener that does not mention those questions. That's more just social emotional learning type questions to help drive the programs that's implemented within their buildings, and then plan interventions for students based on the skill sets.
I think it's an excellent question. Based on what you're telling me, it seems like that it isn't for research purposes. So it seems like this section wouldn't apply, but I would like to have some more conversations about that before we release the guidance and see how we can further clarify some of that to help counselors out.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
So I do understand about at least if the screener or the questionnaire has some pieces like some mental health questions and things like that. Definitely parent permission. My question is if a parent, we send the permission home, the parent's like, absolutely, I don't want my student to participate in this. And I think we're supposed to give them some other sort of option to do and things like that. I guess my question is if the parent continues not to, continues to say, opt out, I don't want to participate in this, and something was to happen to that student, has a mental health issue, completed suicide, something like that, what is the liability on the school and those types of things when we have offered these services repeatedly, parent keeps denying permission? Is there any liability based on the school when we've offered these services and they've been refused?
So that's going to depend on very unique facts and circumstances of every case. We'll talk more broadly. In this situation, what you're talking about, a well-being questionnaire or assessment being delivered to the student. If the parent opts out of that, they say, we don't want our student to answer this questionnaire. That's not going to alleviate the school district's responsibility if you have reason to believe that the student is in crisis and may be at risk of suicide, right? There are still other options. Number one being referring the student to a mental health counselor outside the school district, and also providing some type of emergency notification if emergency services need to be called to intervene. The school district is still going to be, held responsible for acting reasonably in that situation. If a student demonstrates a pattern of behavior that gives someone reasonable cause to believe they're going to harm themselves, then the district is not going to be able to point to the fact that the parent opted out of a survey to relieve themselves of liability, right? The next question is going to be, well, just because we didn't take the survey, why didn't you refer them for some other health services? And I will say that Senate Bill 150 does have a specific provision related to emergency services, and it basically, says nothing in this law would impact a district's ability to seek or provide emergency medical or mental health services for a student. So if you think that the student is in immediate, harm, then kind of all of the requirements here of Senate Bill 150 is not going to prevent the district from getting the student connected to the services that he or she needs.
Well, in order for us, if we see a child that's in crisis and, we believe that emergency assistance is needed, we have to get parent permission first. We cannot provide the emergency assistance unless the parent provides permission. And even then, sometimes they'll provide permission, and when the referral comes back with the recommendations, the parent will not follow it.
Right. So if that's the case, right, you see the student in crisis, you have followed the district's policies and procedures for contacting the parents to say we need to get them referred for emergency services because of this crisis situation that they're experiencing. That occurs, or either the parent says no, or it occurs and the parent doesn't follow through with the recommendations, then those facts and circumstances are going to be significant in alleviating liability.
Thank you for clarifying, Kate. I think that's what I was trying to get to as well, and I don't think I was making sense. So thank you for saying that, because I've had that situation before, and ultimately, as the district, we chose to make a referral to community-based services because we felt like it was such a dire situation that the parent, chose not to get help, and we had offered lots of services, lots of times, and they kept, declining, and it finally did come down to an emergency sort of service situation like that. So thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that.
Okay. All right. Well, the last part just mentions, the question is if the health services or mental health services related to human sexuality, contraception, or family planning notification provided to parents at the beginning of the school year changes, must a new notification be provided? And based on that section 1, as part of the school district's effort to provide the safe and supportive learning environment for students, the school shall notify the parents if they change the health services or mental health services related to those 3 areas that it provides, and shall obtain parental consent prior to providing health or mental health services to the student. So that's if something were to change at some point throughout the school year. Okay. So any other questions now that you've kind of let it sunk in a little bit over the past little while? Anything else you'd like questions about or clarifications? Because these have all been great questions.
Yeah, I think I confused. I don't know. I do. I do have a question, and that is just going back to my original example, or one of the examples I presented, which was a student comes in the morning, is upset, was not referred, and just talks about, I had this argument with my mom and dad, I can't concentrate on my studies now, and then I talk to them, get them calmed down, they go back to class. After the fact, will I then need to contact the parents?
Yeah, okay. Sorry, making sure I was unmuted. So that, I think your question gets to whether or not it's health services or mental health services. In your situation, mental health services, right?
Uh-huh.
Was it mental health services? I think that we need to further clarify that in our guidance document. That's a good, I appreciate the call out there, and we'll try to put some additional clarity around that in our guidance document. Where do academic services end and mental health services begin? That's the question. And I'm not sure that we'll be great at answering that, but we can provide some additional clarity around that, and we'll probably need some help from you, Heather, in fleshing that out as well.
Sure. Can I throw something with that? I mean,
yeah,
it's all pounded in our heads through grad school that our work is psychoeducational, that we operate within the school environment, and that we, in the words of, I will steal these words for my whole career, but Damian Sweeney said once in a class that I took from him, he's amazing, as we all know, I need you to be therapeutic, but not offer therapy. And so all in the name, right, of allowing them to be the most successful students that they can be, and to operate within the classroom and the school structure. And so I just think that's the big question for me. I'm not going into my role, and my competencies do not include, therapy with my students. It's really being therapeutic to allow them. I'm a first responder, right? We as school counselors are mental health first responders. And so I know I'm speaking for myself, but I bet school counselors across the state will want some real clarity on where are the boundaries of that, of when to notify.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that question. I think that's excellent. Good feedback for us.
I have, there's a couple of different thoughts that I have. My first one is, I consider everything I do academic. If a child is not reading at a 3rd grade level, but is in 3rd grade, we provide them with interventions to overcome that barrier. My job is all about helping students, families overcome barriers to their educational success. So I do consider everything I do to be academic. There are some things that are more mental, because those can be barriers to academic success. It's really hard to do your best when you haven't eaten breakfast, or you watched your dad get arrested last night, or whatever. A major concern I have is when a child is referred to me and I have to make a CPS report. Do I have to notify mom and dad that that student was referred to me and we had to make a CPS report?
No. So you would potentially have to or notify the parent that they were referred to you, but not that you made a CPS report.
So when they say,
and depending,
I don't have to tell you that.
Well, that could be different than, and we made a CPS report, right? And again, there is the language in the statute as well that says if you believe that notifying the parent would result in abuse to the child, which obviously you do if you've made a CPS report, that you would then not notify them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then this is my last concern, I think, for right now. I have always been taught with my background, and then just with the different trainings that I have had for mental health, for therapy, for being a trauma-informed care, mental health first aid, that, it is always incredibly important that if a child comes to you and says, someone touched my cookie, that you confirm, do you mean your vagina? Or do you mean your penis? Do you mean your breast? Do you mean your butt? And I have had parents call me and be very upset that I told their child that it was not their cookie, it was their vagina. And that's part of human sexuality and family planning and all that dynamics. So that's just, I don't know what the answer is, but I want that. I think that needs to be out there as well.
Great. Yep. Good feedback.
Okay.
Sorry. So I think we've got some really good feedback to help
Mm-hmm.
us clarify and finalize this guidance document.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And even after we're finished today, if you all think of anything else, please email me, because I know we will be working on this pretty quickly, to make sure that we can get it out rather soon, because we know, like Todd's already mentioned, districts are already starting to put together policies, and and essentially it's going to change some things for how school counselors may operate and things to consider moving forward. So, all right. Well, thank you, Lindsay and Todd, for being here, and Mickey. I really appreciate it, because this has been very helpful. So I cannot thank you all enough for answering questions and helping us with this document. So thank you all for being here.
I want to back that. I'm nobody, but I want to back that up, because it is sometimes very frustrating to feel like these laws and things are being created without any input from those who it impacts. So it is very nice to just have a chance to sort of say, these are our concerns. Here's how it impacts us in real life. And, be able to provide that feedback.
Yes, I hear you. Had that more broad feedback been given at the time the legislation, we're going through the system, we probably wouldn't have nearly as many questions on the back end. But so is the nature of the legislative process. So.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to just kind of finish up with a few things. So I did want to make sure, I've already shared this with the Superintendent's Advisory Council, and it's going to be shared with the Principal's Advisory Council as well in a couple of weeks. But this is our, if you haven't seen it yet, the 2022 school counselor and school-based mental health provider use of time data that was collected over the past year. This is what your superintendents submit every year by November 1st for any school counselors, and now school social workers, your school psychologist, and your school-based mental health therapist submit their use of time, their activities. I know you all have done it for at least the past 2 years. So it was exciting this past year. We had 100% of our districts submit their data. And of course, we still know there's still a few errors here and there with fidelity, but it was much improved based on 2021's data. So this moving forward is going to help, and it already has started a lot of conversations, like you all have actually mentioned today, about your use of time, being allowed to make these phone calls for these referrals, like we've kind of been talking through today. So there are a lot of people who are asking questions about this, which is very exciting. about what we are doing in our schools and what we are allowed to do in our schools. So you can see we had over 1,800 school counselors report their use of time. 100% of our districts, like I said, shared it, and you can see from the different levels who reported. 39% from elementary, 22 from middle, and so on. And this year we added a student component because we have our quantitative data, but we also wanted to look at anecdotal and getting some other stakeholders to start giving feedback and input about what are they seeing our school counselors do. And from all over the state, our KDE Student Advisory Council, they gave us great feedback and great information about their school counselors. And then Lieutenant Governor Coleman student groups, they shared some different information. And there's been some other student groups that have worked with our whole child, whole school, whole community with some of those stakeholder groups as well. And overall, I found it very just enlightening and inspiring that they see the work you do. They see the importance of what school counselors are meant to be doing, and they understand that you are supposed to be seeing students. However, for the most part, a lot of them see school counselors not seeing students. They are doing other activities, which we know in our world are those inappropriate activities, but they are seeing them do more of the scheduling, testing, things like that. And their recommendations, they would love to see us be able to see students more for some of those mental health type topics and stresses, anxieties, because from their perspective, that's what their peers are dealing with more so even than the college career readiness topics. Which I think we all know based on the research that's been done and the data coming out, but it was interesting to hear the students say that. And so some of them, and not all of them obviously, but a few mentioned they had peers waiting weeks to months to just see their school counselor who's there every day, which is concerning. But they do recognize it's not necessarily their fault. They do want to see kids, but they may not be really allowed to based on what they're assigned. So I thought this was probably, to me, my favorite part of the data was that they are wanting to see our counselors and they value what we all do. So I wanted to make sure I shared that. The Kentucky School Security Marshall Report also includes some school counselor data, which is helping us with fidelity with what's actually happening in our schools. So a certified school counselor is employed at 93% of our districts. 56% of them do report they're not meeting their goal of the 1 to 250 student to provider ratio, which we know. Right now, Kentucky, we're currently about 348 students to one provider, which is every year it's decreasing, which is good. But it's like we talk about in any trainings we do, whenever I know I get to speak to superintendents and principals and any administrator, the bigger picture here is we want those ratios to decrease, but what are the counselors doing in the schools? Are they really seeing students even if their ratio is 1 to 250? And that's the other part of what we have to work on and improve. And 96%, they did respond. School counselors are keeping their use of time. But keep in mind as well, a lot of school counselors are not necessarily asked directly about their use of time. And so that's something that I know is going to be improved as we go along with this report. So a lot of you all as school counselors, they may start asking you all questions just to see if you're seeing kids, some of your activities you're doing, just to gain some better feedback to keep improving what we're doing for our counselors in Kentucky. So there's the funding. You can see 95%, of course, spent their time in one building, and then the funding gets into there about most of them were by local dollars. We do know some, of course, are by federal and by state funding. With the ESSER funds, of course, they were able to purchase several positions for a little while longer. I know that's going to be a concern coming up very soon. Is how our funding may shift with our school-based mental health providers and the services that we can offer. And so how are they spending their time? So we do know that direct services, Kentucky, we are recommended to do 60% direct services for students in front of students. And then school counselors reported overall about a third of their time is still spent on those inappropriate activities, which I'll show you that table in just a second. For the appropriate services, about 50% said they're spending time in front of students. That's a little bit up from last year, still not where we want it to be. So that's your large group, your small group, and your individual counseling. And then, of course, the remainder of that time is spent in those indirect services, which are those meetings held on behalf of students, or your other time, which is your data analysis, your program planning. And we do know there are school functioning tasks that you are supposed to do, for as it's bus duty in the mornings, having to chaperone a dance here or there. So we do know things like that are going to exist. Here are the top 10 inappropriate activities that were reported by our school counselors. You can see building schedules is number one. And when we do talk to this about with our administrators, we do remind them, if you're counseling a student about their schedules, that is appropriate. That's one-on-one, your goal setting, college career readiness, academics. But it's when you're in Infinite Campus doing all the logistic work, that's when it becomes that inappropriate activity. And so that's what we want to try to shift, more of the guidance counseling in Infinite Campus versus you actually meeting with students about their needs. Of course, ARC chairperson and 504 coordinator are always going to be in our top three because we know that most of us do have to chair those meetings and be those coordinators, which based on our recommendations, it's not appropriate for us to do that. But if we do come to a meeting on behalf of a student, that's appropriate. But being the chairperson, no. And of course, there's supervising, coordinating testing. It's not appropriate. We're not supposed to be the building assessment coordinators. So that was, of course, there is spot number 5. And of course, if you have to enter or maintain records, that's not appropriate for counselors. Now, obviously, as students transfer in and out, if you're looking over some paperwork that may come in to help you, meet that child, what's going on with them, see their past, absolutely, but not having to maintain them and copy and things like that. Any type of data you all may do that's not affiliated with your school counseling program. So like if you are entering data, if you're having to enter grades or printing report cards, things like that is more logistics, not really affiliated with your school counseling program. So of course, just keeping up with paperwork. And then this one, of course, will go away pretty soon. Any tasks associated with the pandemic. A lot of counselors reported just having to cover classes more often due to sicknesses. And then, of course, shortages and things like that. So hopefully that one will go pretty well down in the next couple of years. But those were the top 10 that people were related that they are assigned to do that are inappropriate. And so the recommendations that we talk about to consider, because we don't want to, obviously more funding would be amazing. But without more funding, we need to consider how to start getting creative with what we're doing in our schools and our districts. So we discuss about considering what the allocations are for school counselors and the mental health providers to allow student access. So as districts get their funds, how are they being used? How many school counselors are there? How many, if they have school social workers, if they have school psychs, how are they using that money to ensure the allocations are what they need to be to meet those districts' needs? The role of the school counselor and the tasks should be examined to determine what their time is being spent on. You all know in most of the trainings we do together and all the conversations, we really promote those school counselor and administrative relationships to make sure they know what you're doing and you're advocating for what a school counselor is, because we still have a lot of work to do with administrators just not understanding school counselor versus guidance. It's a very big deal, and you all know that. So ensuring that they do understand that, for example, being the chairperson for an ARC meeting is not appropriate. But if they're not going to assign that to you, considering how do we start shifting those activities off of school counselors, and then who's going to do them. So that obviously takes planning and collaboration. And then consider supports the district may need in order to continue growth to meet these needs. And we do know there's hard conversations happening, and a lot of districts are, pushing forward and shifting these activities off our school counselors. And I know when we do talk to administrators, the biggest thing we want to think about is you all are the experts in all these different topics. And if you're not available to see students about what they need to be seen about, who else in the building is going to be able to give them the services that a school counselor would? And I think that's when we need to take a look and take a step back at what we're doing. Because if you're stuck in 3 hours of ARC meetings and students need you, who's going to see those students? Or they're going to have to wait for 3 hours, or a family when they come in and they need support. So just thinking about your skill sets and what you all can offer. And then the school-based mental health provider report. Keep in mind, this one's pretty broad, just based on how the legislation is written. For Kentucky, it kind of lumps all of us together, but we do know that the recommended ratios are different. Some of their activities are different, so it's not all the same across the board, and we know that very well. So this is more of a broader report, and we had over 1,700 respond, and you can see the different levels. Most of them had actually selected other qualified mental health providers, that they had a degree or certification in counseling, psychology, or social work. They may serve one or many schools, but a lot of them actually serve within one school building. So I found that interesting. And then it talked about how 65% of these providers reported they do spend their time in one building versus about a third are in, the other 35% are in those multiple sites, like I know tends to happen just based on their ratios and allocations. So basically, just for their tasks, for the mental health providers, they're only seeing students about 31% of their time. Now, based on what they are assigned to do, like for example, we know a lot of school psychologists usually tend to a lot of special education type assessments, paperwork, analysis. So they really wouldn't see a lot of students, directly as counseling, or addressing issues like that. 14% of their time consulting with stakeholders, is what they reported. Very minimal were they spending their time, based on what they reported, on some of those other tasks that they may be assigned to do, like crisis situations, helping create behavior intervention plans, coordinating small groups, collaborating with the school counselor within that program. And school social workers and psychologists, they actually spent more time consulting on behalf of students, whereas those other mental health providers spent the most time individually counseling students, which are your school-based therapists. And then school social workers did spend more time than other providers referring those resources to our families. And school psychs spent more time, usually attending on the school-based teams than the other providers. So some recommendations for those providers, we look at examining again their role of what they are recommended to do, what their true ratios are meant to be, and appropriately assigning them those activities that they need to be doing. And determining the collaboration. A lot of our schools have more than one of these, whether it's more school counselors, a school counselor, and a social worker. How do they enhance each other, and stay in their lane, but still collaboratively make sure that kids are being seen, families' needs are being met, to provide that comprehensive outlook? And then just thinking about any training or funding that may match the role of that provider. So again, that's just kind of a snapshot, and those reports, they're actually on my site for KDE. If you want to see the whole PDF, for the school counselor one, that report does show every district, based on the educational cooperative region. So if you want to see how your region is doing, how your district showed up compared to some other districts, just to see where you are, that might be something you want to glance at. Okay. Oop, there we go. Okay. All right. Any questions about the use of time before we wrap up with just a couple other updates?
I have a question, of course.
Mhm.
You know, I would love to see the data divided between elementary, middle, and high school, and
Okay.
how that differs. Because I know, you know, in my specific district, once you get up into middle and high school, there are assistant principals, there's more than one counselor, they have ARC chair positions, they have back positions, but at the elementary level, there's not an assistant principal. We are the back, we are the the chair. And so I'd be really interested to see how that data is different between the grade levels.
Okay. Yeah. Kate, I will absolutely put that on our list because we're gonna start tweaking our form again for next school year because it's already going to be due again November 1st. So yeah, I'll add that and talk to our data team to see if they can, because I'm sure they are amazing. I'm sure that could be done probably. So thank you for that. Okay. Anybody else have a question or a clarification or a question, a reflection about anything? Okay. So for this next school year, I want to just go ahead and give you the dates of our statewide cadres and our trainings we do. So you all know that back in February, Melissa Wainwright, who is a director for MTSS at KDE, her and myself, we presented, showing you, and now it's released, our Kentucky MTSS for school counseling guidance documents, just to show in each tier what school counselors should consider and are recommended to be doing, how it aligns to the ASCA comprehensive national model, and then of course our Kentucky MTSS and our framework. It's all interconnected. So in September, and this is just going to be a statewide, you can sign up, which that Google form will be coming soon. We are going to provide about an hour and a half to do a data protocol training. So what that will look like is we are taking what we released and now we are releasing a flow chart to consider when you are looking at your data. So we are going to have samples of school data from behavior to academic to college career. And we're actually going to practice walking through that process of here's my data, here's my root cause analysis, but now what do I do about it? And what services can I offer? Who else do I need to collaborate with? So that is going to be a lot of a practicing type of training. So be looking for that in September. And then our statewide cadres, our last one for this year is next week. John Burnett is going to be with us. And I don't know if you've seen him on social media, but he is a school counselor and he is very engaging. He's presented all over the place. But he's going to help us rethink self-care for all stakeholders. So self-care is getting a little bit overgeneralized, where I think it's the true purpose of it is getting lost. So he's going to help us narrow it back down to what it truly is, and you're going to walk away with strategies for yourself, for your staff, for your students, and for your families. So that will help you look at some things you might want to try for next year with some of those stakeholders. So I'm very excited to have him next week. And then October 24th is our first one for that next school year. Ashley Wright, she was a National School Counselor of the Year finalist this past year. She's going to be looking at some Tier 1 lessons with us about resiliency for our students at all levels, and just for us as counselors to help us reflect and review and kind of reform, especially early in the year, what we hope to accomplish. So she's going to give us a lot of good strategies to take away from that. And then the next one will be December 5th. And then February 6th will be usually our all day one, our 9 to 3 summit. And then June 4th will be our last one next year in 2024. Okay, so just those dates are there for you. Go ahead and mark on your calendars. And of course, our co-ops are always so amazing to help us collaborate and put that on. Some are in person, hybrid, or virtual. So it allows as many of you as possible to be able to attend. And then some other updates. So today was the deadline for our advisory council applications for the next group that will be joining us starting in September. This will be your last year to be on this advisory council, and then they're going to join us for this last year to kind of see how things go, to start helping us just gain more feedback, and then they will take over moving into 24-25. So you will get to see a lot of new faces come September. And then the statewide use of time, we have some templates. You all were able to pilot for about 3 months. Those are being finalized this week, and they are going to be released by next week. They are providing you all with 3 different options to keep your use of time. So when you do have to submit it to your superintendents, everything's going to be tied together. So that way you won't have to scrounge and try to find your data, so it's going to be a lot more streamlined. But again, this is something that's not mandated, of course, but it's just going to make it easier for you to submit your use of time. And if you ever have to, at some last minute pop up and say, oh, take this to a meeting, you have it. And it takes 2 minutes a day. So that will be released. So thank you for those of you who were able to pilot some of that and give feedback about it. We are also creating a school-based mental health provider overview document based on our use of time. Now that we do include those social workers and our school psychs and our school-based therapists, there's a lot of muddy water out there about who's doing what, who is actually counseling, what kind of certifications should you have when districts are considering who to hire, and what job qualifications and requirements that they do assign them. So I've been very lucky to get feedback from all the different state organizations and associations for this, and several different experts. So that's going to be released very soon, which is going to help just show an overview of this is what a school psych is, certification. These are some recommendations to think about. School counselors for each of the 4. And then we are starting a new counselor academy next school year. I'm collaborating with the cooperatives. We're already starting to schedule some in-person kickoffs at every single co-op. And so information about that is going to be coming out by the end of July into August. So keep an eye out with your districts and your regional cooperatives. We'll be releasing it from KDE, of course, as well. But this is a year-long initiative. We really want to help build our new counselors in those first few years, whether it's switching districts or it's coming right out of college, or it could be a counselor who's been in it for 15 years and just hasn't seen the framework and maybe is still in that guidance counseling mindset and needs help shifting over to the school counseling, thought and processes. So more information, like I said, will be coming out very soon about that, but we are very excited to be able to offer that next year with all of our cooperatives. And I think, okay, so here's our meetings for next year. Please mark those on your calendar. We are changing the time, so they will be from 10 to 11:30 Eastern time, but those are our 4 dates we do plan to meet. All right. And like I said, we'll have a lot of new faces in September, so we'll get to know some other counselors who get to join us for this next school year. And as always, if you all think of questions, considerations for the Senate Bill 150 guidance document or anything else, please email me because like I said, we're going to be working on that very now very quickly. So I appreciate all the honest and feedback and questions that you all were able to give. because it does help drive this work. So we can help every counselor in Kentucky. So, okay. Well, anything else? All right. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us in June. I really appreciate it. And as always, reach out with anything you need.